Muriel! Oh, Muriel! 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 Where are you? Where are you? Muriel! Okay, I thought I heard you out here. But wait, you said you were going out to ride alpacas over an hour ago. But have you just been out here this whole time?
Yes!
Are you going to tell me why?
I'm going to stay out here until I've absorbed the full power of the sun. Join me, Deter. Become the sun.
Here we go. You know what? Sure. Some sun might be nice, actually. But give me a minute so I can put on some sunblock or sunscreen or something.
Some what? You can't block the sun, Deter. You can't screen away its light. You need all its power.
Muriel, stop! A little sun may be fine, but with this weather, I'd burn up instantly.
You'd what? You told me the other day people are mostly made of water. Now they can burn? Which is it, Deter?
Damn, alright, so neither. Or both, I guess. People, Muriel, have a layer of various tissues covering their bodies called skin. And that skin can get damaged by the sun over time. Understand?
Oh, sure. Deter?
Yes, Muriel?
Why does human skin cook in the sun?
The sun. Kind of amazing, right? A massive ball of plasma and fusion reactions, powering our solar system with light and energy as we rocket through space, orbiting around it at frankly quite a ridiculous speed. And for the purposes of this explanation, it is also the cause of potentially lasting damage on people's skin. But why does the sun do this? What exactly happens when the sun burns someone's skin?
Yes, that's what I'm asking.
Well, hopefully today I'll be able to explain at least that much, Muriel, as we take off into this stellar world of light and heat, and how it affects us right here on Earth. Or something. Okay, so first off, the sun may seem unique from our perspective, all floating up there, all bright and whatever, but really it is just another star, one of billions and billions in this one galaxy alone. These massive outer space reactors produce energy by fusing lighter elements within them into heavier elements. And more specifically, for a relatively young star like the sun, hydrogen into helium. There is, of course, a lot more to all of this. As stars fuse heavier and heavier elements, other stuff happens. Some stars sort of condense while others collapse and then explode. Or is it rapidly expand? There's really just so much.
Deter!
Right. Different discussion. So for our star, the sun, as its reactions go on, a whole spectrum of radiation can get released, in part in the form of the aforementioned heat and light. All of that spreads out in every direction from the sun, meaning, at least from our perspective, quite a bit hits the Earth. Thankfully, various layers of the atmosphere, at least currently, interact with this radiation, blocking, absorbing, reflecting, etc., and whatever remains, well, eventually gets to us. Among this radiation are various wavelengths of light, including UV or ultraviolet light. These are essentially any part of the electromagnetic spectrum in this section of the chart. And again, for the purpose of this explanation, I will break them up into UVA, which have longer wavelength, and UVB, which have shorter wavelength. This distinction will matter later occasionally, but then also sometimes it doesn't, so I'll also refer to both of them as simply UV light.
Very helpful, Deter.
Thank you, since these are the wavelengths of light that I am particularly concerned about, Muriel. Okay, so that's the light part of this interaction, Muriel. Now let's discuss skin and how it works.
Sounds like fun!
Okay, sure, why not? So, as you can see, The epidermis, that outer layer of skin, acts as a protective barrier for the body. It can also be subdivided into like 5 distinct layers that do specific things and whatever, but essentially this uppermost keratin-rich layer of skin keeps germs and the like from entering, contains Langerhans cells, which have a more direct guard-like effect along with the immune system, and it also protects against rain, sun, remember that, and other elements. Not all those, Muriel. Well, I guess not entirely. Stuff like water and dirt and things. And other annoyances. We're getting off topic again. Anyway, the epidermis is also the layer that contains melanin, and melanin-creating cells called melanocytes. I think it's melanocytes. I don't know how to pronounce words. The epidermis is also the layer that contains the pigment melanin. The epidermis is also the layer that contains the pigment melanin. I can't say words. The epidermis is also the layer that contains the pigment melanin and melanin-creating cells called melanocytes. Right, so this middle layer of skin, the dermis, contains a fair amount of collagen and elastin. These proteins help keep skin strong, resilient, as well as flexible. It can also be further subdivided, but this layer generally is composed of hair follicles, connective tissues, blood vessels, sweat glands, and also some lymphatic tissue. The fatty layer of skin below the dermis is called the hypodermis, and it contains more connective tissue, connecting to neighboring muscles and bones, additional or continued blood vessels and nerves, and as I just said, a fair amount of subcutaneous fatty tissue. These layers, along with hair, nails, oil glands, sweat glands, are all part of the integumentary system. There really wasn't any reason to bring that up, I just wanted to say it. Another thing that makes the skin so interesting is that each layer interacts with the outside world in different ways. The hypodermis, for example, provides cushioning for muscles and bones when someone falls or is in some way at risk for damage. The nerve endings in the dermis help the body recognize things like texture, temperature, and pain. And then, of course, the epidermis helps keep the body protected from the direct outside world, like, for example, from UV light. Muriel?
But Deter, why is UV light, or whatever, a problem? Haven't humans been exposed to the sun forever?
I mean, fair enough. Good question. For the most part, yeah. People have lived with quite a bit of sun exposure, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's entirely good for us. Sure, a bit of sun can be good for a variety? Sure, a bit of sun can be good for a variety of biological processes, such as the production of vitamin D. But like many things in nature, in excess, there can actually be a problem. And now, look at that. It's already started. Muriel, careful. As you can see, the skin there on my arm is already a bit red. This is caused by it's all falling apart. Okay, so as you can see, the skin there on my arm is already a bit red. This is caused by UV light exposure triggering an inflammatory response. This can happen within less than 15 minutes of UV light exposure. But of course, this is where it gets interesting. To limit damage to the epidermis, melanin, that pigment I mentioned before, produced from melanocytes in the skin, will begin to darken through oxidation. Over the next couple days, as long as there is no further UV exposure, oh my god. Like every time I say Milano, I just think of the cookies. It's like it can't be the cookie cells. God, I want Milanos now. Anyway, these melanocytes in the epidermis will begin to increase in both number and size and produce more melanin in an attempt to protect the rest of my skin. The reason this is so interesting is because melanin itself is able to absorb UV light. By the way, this process is called a tan. Yeah, that's right. A tan is a protective measure of the body to prevent further skin damage after UV light exposure. Isn't that just really, really interesting? I find that incredible. It's like your body got bombarded with deadly UV light or whatever, and your body's natural response is like, throw stuff at it that's better at absorbing it than the rest of your skin. And we'll keep it around for a while until the skin replaces itself. Because obviously you can't get out of the sun, so we're just gonna do it for you. Oh, it's great. Biology's fascinating. Ow! You gonna stop that anytime soon, Muriel? If anyone else has deity-powered friends, highly recommend. Realistically, all people have different levels of melanin in their skin already. But even so, everyone's skin still interacts with the sun in the same sort of way, just to different levels. Basically, people with more melanin in their skin may have better initial protection from UV light than people with little melanin in their skin, but everyone will still need to protect their skin from whatever their individual level of excess UV light exposure happens to be. For example, if I fail to protect myself from the sun and therefore experience more UV light exposure, then this condition can worsen considerably and fairly quickly. Muriel, I am fair-skinned. Additional UV light exposure can increase redness, swelling, skin tenderness, and even result in blistering and just flat-out pain. And if you had access to a cross-section of my skin, which you don't, you may be able to see major changes across multiple layers of skin, including the loss of those Langerhans cells, as well as vacuolated keratinocytes in the sunburned epidermis. Additionally, within 30 minutes of UV light exposure, the dermis, the second layer of skin down, may also experience vascular changes, including enlargement of endothelial cells and edema caused by mast cell degranulation. To put this another way, Muriel, more sunburn could also result in a variety of, well, it's not a variety, it's very specific. To put this all another way, Muriel, additional sunburn or more severe sunburn can result in swelling as well as kind of messing with the immune system. Prolonged severe sunburn, however, can even result in systemic problems, things like fever, nausea, and chills. Some of that layer of skin may slaw off. A nicer way of putting that is it starts peeling. Personally, I don't think I've ever had a sunburn that bad. But that sounds awful, right? And unfortunately, another result of every single sunburn you've ever had in your life and will ever have in your life is the chance of an increased risk of skin cancer. Hear me here. Any sort of sunburn can pounce on itself. Like it builds on itself and increases your risk of skin
Cancer? Why cancer, Deter?
Really? That's what made you interrupt me. Not all the medical terms and their totally accurate pronunciation. Skin layers, maybe? Just, all right. Well, fair enough, really. It is honestly very serious. The reason there is a chance for an increased risk of skin cancer is because of that UV light. As described, UVA and UVB light can damage skin cells almost immediately. But what I didn't mention before is that, well, in the case of UVB light, it can directly damage those cells' DNA. This interaction induces the formation of thymine-thymine cyclobutene dimers, which triggers a DNA repair response in the body, which can then result in the induction of apoptosis of those and possibly neighboring cells, as well as the release of inflammatory markers such as prostaglandins, also reactive oxygen species, and bradykinins, all of which I absolutely pronounced incorrectly. Again, to put it another way, UV light can have such a disastrous effect on skin cells that it is sometimes more advantageous for our body's survival to terminate those cells than to attempt to repair them. And those dead cells are the ones that flake off, by the way. Wild. The problem, though, is that this sort of damage is cumulative, meaning that even if the most severely damaged cells are removed, small DNA damage can build up over time in the remaining cells. This can lead to some pretty disastrous conditions. Stuff like basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and melanoma. Talking about all the science, sometimes you can forget how, real this sort of stuff can get. These are actual conditions that a lot of people have to deal with.
Wow, Deter! Sounds like the sun is just plain evil and should be dealt with accordingly, right?
What? No! Nothing like that, actually. It's more that if our goal is to live as long and as healthy a life as possible, which I sure hope is everyone's goal, then we, as, well, people with skin, need to learn how to deal with potential, note the use of the word potential here, issues like excess UV light exposure. For example, there are many factors that can directly affect a person's risk. Simple things such as the time of day, altitude, weather, can all affect how much UV light a person is exposed to. There are also more global issues like ozone depletion, and more personal ones like each person's skin phenotype, their age, possible genetic conditions, and if they are taking any medications that can affect light sensitivity. That was an interesting one. There are actually medications that straight up make you more susceptible to sunburns. That's crazy and fascinating. I don't know them off the top of my head, but if you heard them, you would probably recognize them. Anyway, any and all of these factors can influence the frequency and intensity of sunburns, and both those factors can affect your risk of something more severe in the future. It's true. The frequency and severity of sunburns you get throughout your life can affect issues in the future. Like literally just if you get sunburned a lot, it just messes you up in the future. Something that's important to remember, though, is that this information doesn't have to all be doom and gloom. Understanding risk can also lead you to understand the many basic protection measures that everyone can take to stay safe in regard to the sun. Like, of course, understanding your risk factors is the first thing, but honestly, simply reducing the amount of UV light you're exposed to is probably one of the most important things to remember. In this respect, sunblock and sunscreen can certainly help. They are types of lotions, or whatever the case may be, that can be applied to the skin that can help protect against potentially dangerous levels of UV light exposure. Something with broad spectrum protection may work best, as it can protect the skin from both UVA and UVB light exposure. As an aside, how exactly these two things work, sunscreen and sunblock, is absolutely fascinating subject in and of itself. Maybe that'll be a subject for another discussion, because the differences with the two approaches alone is fascinating. One sort of reflects light, the other kind of absorbs light, and it's all incredibly interesting. Right. Anyway, other UV light protections include so-called sun-safe clothing, specific eyewear, hats, being in the shade in general, when and where you work during the day if possible, and you can even add special filters to windows and other glass and so forth. There's actually a lot of options.
But wait, Deter! I thought you said that people need some sunlight. Don't they need some UV light exposure?
That's very true, Muriel. Well done. Thanks for pointing that out. It's all about moderation, really, especially since everyone is different and people live in so many different places with sometimes wildly different UV indexes. That's the measure of UV radiation in a given area. Anyway, this all means that the precautions and risk factors for sunburns must be different as well, which then, of course, also means it's possible a different amount of direct sun exposure is needed for each individual person. And it's kinda up to each to figure that sort of thing out. The sun doesn't have to be an enemy, or even an antagonistic force. Like so much more, it's just another part of nature that we must learn to live with, not necessarily in defiance of. So, hopefully, anyone equipped with this sort of information can now better assess their risk factors and then take more appropriate steps to prevent, or at least reduce, the risk of skin damage. Well, at least from the sun. So, anyway, what do you think about everything I've said, Muriel? Do you think you have a better understanding of why some people may not want to just jump directly into the sun all the time? Maybe. And why protective measures against UV light may be important? Perhaps? Okay, do you at least understand why human skin may quote-unquote burn?
I sure do, Deter. In fact, I think I have an idea of how to help everyone.
Muriel, what do you mean? What? Wait, stop! Where are you? Muriel? Tell me your idea first! Muriel! Tell me your idea! Tell me what your idea is! Muriel, come back! Muriel, can you hear me? Muriel!
If you have any interest in another deep dive into an aspect of the fascinating and often overly complex world we find ourselves in, then please feel free to subscribe and click on the bell to be notified of the next video. There's also a Patreon and other support options in the description, along with various citations in case you're interested in that sort of thing. Oh, and also, Deter!
Alright. If you actually have a sunburn, by the way, and somehow that brought you to this video, all I can say with confidence as a not doctor, I'm not a doctor, by the way, is to please get out of the sun immediately and away from any other source of UV light, or away from whatever UV light you're currently exposed to. And since, as you all know at this point, there's so many factors that can go into treatment, or at the very least, understanding the severity of the symptoms, please then contact an actual doctor for those treatment options. Please. And with that, see you all next time.
Bye!
Oh, Muriel.